If you're over 60 and struggling with joint pain, what you eat could be making your discomfort significantly worse. I'm going to share the 5 worst foods that are silently intensifying your joint pain. Foods many people consume daily without realizing the damage they're causing. Joint pain affects millions of adults over 60, but many don't realize that dietary choices play a critical role in either soothing or aggravating this pain. The foods I'll discuss today trigger inflammation pathways that directly impact your joints, potentially accelerating deterioration and causing unnecessary suffering. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly which foods to eliminate from your diet to experience significant relief. You'll also discover healthier alternatives that can actually help reduce inflammation and support joint health. This information could be life-changing if you've been dealing with persistent joint discomfort. Let's dive into the 5 worst offenders when it comes to joint pain after 60. 1. Refined sugar and high fructose corn syrup. The first major culprit behind joint pain is refined sugar and high fructose corn syrup. These sweeteners are perhaps the most inflammatory substances in the modern diet, and they're hiding more foods than you might realize. When you consume foods high in refined sugar, your body experiences a significant inflammatory response. Research published in the Journal of Clinical Nutrition has demonstrated that sugar consumption triggers the release of cytokines, inflammatory messengers that can target your joints and intensify pain. For adults over 60, whose inflammation-regulating systems are already less efficient, this effect is even more pronounced. What makes refined sugar particularly problematic is its presence in so many everyday products. Breakfast cereals, condiments, salad dressings, bread, and even many health foods marketed to seniors. A single serving of many commercial yogurts, for instance, can contain up to 4 teaspoons of added sugar, nearly half the daily recommended limit. High fructose corn syrup is equally concerning. This processed sweetener is metabolized differently than regular sugar, creating advanced glycation end products, appropriately called AGEs, that damage collagen and directly affect joint flexibility. A 2018 study in the Rheumatology Journal found that participants who reduced their intake of high fructose corn syrup reported a 30% decrease in joint pain after just 12 weeks. Common foods to watch for include soft drinks and fruit juices, breakfast cereals, commercial baked goods, many condiments and sauces, low-fat products that replace fat with sugar. Instead, opt for natural sweeteners in moderation, such as small amounts of raw honey or fresh fruit. Your joints will thank you for making this single change. 2. Processed and red meats. The second category of foods that can significantly worsen joint pain is processed and red meats. This includes bacon, sausage, hot dogs, deli meats, and even many cuts of red meat that appear prominently in the typical American diet. Processed meats contain advanced glycation end products, those inflammatory compounds I mentioned earlier, which form during high-temperature cooking and processing. These AGEs directly contribute to tissue damage and accelerated aging in your joints. The effect is particularly pronounced in adults over 60, whose bodies already produce more AGEs naturally. Additionally, processed meats contain high levels of purines, compounds that break down into uric acid. Elevated uric acid levels are directly linked to gout, an extremely painful form of inflammatory arthritis that commonly affects joints in the feet, ankles, and knees. A study from the Arthritis Foundation found that people who consumed processed meat regularly were 3 times more likely to experience gout flare-ups. Red meat, especially when charred or overcooked, creates compounds called heterocyclic amines that have been shown to trigger inflammatory responses. The Framingham Heart Study, which followed participants for over 55 years, found a clear connection between regular red meat consumption and increased markers of inflammation. For those over 60, the reduced kidney function that naturally occurs with aging means your body has more difficulty clearing these inflammatory compounds, allowing them to affect your joints for longer periods. Healthier protein alternatives include fatty fish, rich in anti-inflammatory omega-3s, legumes like beans and lentils, organic poultry in moderation, plant-based proteins like tempeh and tofu. These alternatives provide necessary protein without the inflammatory components that can worsen joint pain. 3. Vegetable and seed oils high in omega-6 fatty acids. The third major contributor to joint pain that many people over 60 consume daily is vegetable and seed oils high in omega-6 fatty acids. These include soybean oil, corn oil, sunflower oil, safflower oil, and cottonseed oil, oils that have become ubiquitous in processed foods and restaurant meals. While omega-6 fatty acids are essential in small amounts, the modern diet contains far too many omega-6s compared to beneficial omega-3s. This imbalance creates a perfect storm for chronic inflammation. Research from the Journal of Nutritional Biochemistry shows that the ideal ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 should be around 4.1, but most Americans consume a ratio closer to 20.1, creating a highly inflammatory internal environment. When you consume excess omega-6 fatty acids, your body produces pro-inflammatory compounds called eicosanoids. These compounds trigger inflammatory pathways that directly impact your joints, causing increased pain and stiffness. For adults over 60 who already experience more baseline inflammation, this effect can be particularly damaging. What makes these oils especially problematic is their oxidative instability. When heated, these polyunsaturated oils create toxic compounds that damage cellular structures and accelerate joint deterioration. A 2017 study in the International Journal of Rheumatic Diseases found that participants who reduced their consumption of these oils experienced significant improvements in joint mobility and reduced pain scores. Common sources of inflammatory oils include most commercial salad dressings, fried foods and fast food, processed snacks like chips and crackers, many baked goods, margarine and vegetable shortening. Instead, choose oils with anti-inflammatory properties like extra virgin olive oil, avocado oil, and oils rich in omega-3s such as flaxseed oil, for cold applications only. Making this switch can significantly reduce the inflammatory burden on your joints. 4. Gluten and refined grains. The fourth category of foods that can intensify joint pain, especially after 60, is gluten and refined grains. This includes white bread, pasta, many breakfast cereals, and baked goods made with white flour. Gluten, a protein found in wheat, barley, and rye, can trigger inflammatory responses in many people, not just those with celiac disease. Research from the Journal of Arthritis, Research and Therapy indicates that many individuals experience what's called non-celiac gluten sensitivity, which creates systemic inflammation that can target the joints. A study published in the Rheumatology Journal found that 40% of participants with rheumatoid arthritis who eliminated gluten experienced significant reductions in pain and inflammation. Refined grains pose additional problems because they're quickly converted to sugar in your bloodstream, triggering an insulin response that activates inflammatory pathways. The refining process also strips away the fiber and nutrients that help moderate this effect. For adults over 60, whose glucose metabolism is typically less efficient, this inflammatory response can be more pronounced and longer lasting. The glycemic index of refined grains is particularly problematic for joint health. Foods with a high glycemic index cause rapid spikes in blood sugar, leading to the production of advanced glycation end products that damage joint tissue. A 12-month study from the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that participants who consumed a diet high in refined grains showed accelerated cartilage loss compared to those who favored whole grains and other low glycemic foods. Common sources to limit include white bread, rolls, and crackers, traditional pasta, white rice, most commercial cereals, baked goods made with white flour. Better alternatives include genuine whole grains like quinoa, brown rice, buckwheat, and oats, which contain fiber and nutrients that actually help moderate inflammation rather than promote it. 5. Nightshade vegetables. The fifth category that can worsen joint pain for many people over 60 is nightshade vegetables. This might surprise you since vegetables are generally healthy, but for a significant percentage of people with joint sensitivity, nightshades can trigger or worsen symptoms. Nightshade vegetables include tomatoes, potatoes, eggplant, bell peppers, and chili peppers. These plants contain compounds called alkaloids, particularly solanine, which can increase intestinal permeability in sensitive individuals. This increased gut permeability, sometimes called leaky gut, allows inflammatory compounds to enter the bloodstream and target joint tissue. Research from the Cleveland Clinic has found that approximately 20 to 30% of people with inflammatory joint conditions report significant improvement when they eliminate nightshades. For adults over 60, whose digestive systems and immune responses have naturally changed with age, sensitivity to these compounds may be more pronounced. Tomatoes deserve special mention because they contain both solanine and lectins, another compound that can trigger inflammatory responses in sensitive individuals. Tomatoes are also highly acidic, which some research suggests may exacerbate joint pain through altered pH balance. It's important to note that not everyone with joint pain will react to nightshades. The only way to determine if they affect your specific condition is to eliminate them for 2 to 3 weeks, then reintroduce them while carefully monitoring your symptoms. Many people over 60 discover that removing nightshades leads to remarkable improvements in joint comfort and mobility. If you find you're sensitive to nightshades, plenty of nutritious alternatives exist. Sweet potatoes instead of white potatoes, mushrooms instead of eggplant, celery and carrots instead of bell peppers, blueberries and cherries instead of tomatoes in recipes where appropriate, olive tapenade or pesto instead of tomato sauce. These substitutions can provide similar culinary satisfaction without triggering joint pain. Before I share some powerful anti-inflammatory alternatives, let me explain briefly why these foods affect your joints so dramatically, especially after age 60. The connection between diet and joint pain centers around inflammation. While acute inflammation is a normal healing response, chronic inflammation becomes destructive, particularly to joint tissue. The foods we've discussed trigger or perpetuate this chronic inflammatory state. As we age, several factors make us more vulnerable to food-induced inflammation. First, our digestive systems become less efficient, often allowing more potentially inflammatory compounds to enter the bloodstream. Second, the protective cartilage in our joints naturally thins over time, making them more susceptible to inflammatory damage. Third, our immune systems undergo a process called inflammaging, a chronic, low-grade inflammation that becomes more pronounced after 60. Finally, metabolic changes associated with aging alter how we process certain foods, often amplifying their inflammatory effects. This explains why many people notice the connection between certain foods and joint pain becoming more obvious as they age. The good news is that by eliminating these inflammatory triggers, you can experience significant relief, often within just a few weeks.